Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night wherever you are. Welcome along to Marvel Snap Zone's weekly tier list for hit card game battler Marvel Snap. Happy to have you back. Hopefully you've been having a great time snapping away towards the end of the Heroes for Hire season of the game. It's almost the end of Season 3, and we kind of want to focus on most people's kind of biggest need towards the end of the season this season, and that's going to be like how to grind those last few ranks before the season reset. How do you get yourself to infinite and make sure you're scoring all those prizes before a new season happens? We've had confirmation from the guys over at Second Dinner that a patch is coming very, very soon that's going to have lots of fun changes. So we want to make sure that we cover that while we can. So we're going to be doing something a little bit different than our normal format this week. And I'm going to break down for you what we think are some of the best decks to kind of smash away at the ladder. If you're not infinite yet, you want to just grind cubes, make sure you get there, and kind of make sure you're ready for the upcoming season. So before we do that, I'm going to cover a few things for you this week. Just kind of want to talk about some comments we've had, some feedback regarding our tier list in general from the lovely folks over at Reddit in our own personal Discord server, which you should join, by the way. We understand that there is no real available data for something like a tier list right now. There's not exactly any tournament gameplay or anything similar to that in Marvel Snap. And there's an awful lot of bots on the ladder, which kind of means it's hard to gain representative data about win rates, anything to kind of back up our feelings and our opinions. That being said, our writers do our best to kind of outsource, reach out to people if we're not sure about deck lists that we can't play, and of course just play a lot of games ourselves, so we do our best to kind of give you a well-rounded opinion of what we think the ladder looks like, but of course please do keep in mind that there is no data available. However, in a similar vein, we at Marvel Snap Zone are pairing up with Loot Muncher, one of our favourite content creators for Marvel Snap, to bring you a way to play competitive Marvel Snap. It's called Cube Rush. It's a fantastic series that happens every single Wednesday over on Loot Muncher's channel. They pair up with content creators to race against the clock to earn the most cubes in the shortest amount of time. We're going to be running a community cube rush on the 7th of September when the season updates for a brand new reset, and you can come and get involved. So if you want to challenge yourself, you want to prove that you're a great deck builder with Marvel Snap, you just want to play competitively, kind of get out there and explore that while you can. All the information required and the ability to sign up and play that community cube rush is over on the Marvel Snap Zone website now. There's a link in the description you can check out as well. And please feel free to check out Loot Muncher and other content creators on this upcoming Wednesday as they smash away in a community-driven creator challenge to kind of give you an idea of what Cube Rush involves. So please feel free to check that out. If you want our opinion on the current overall metagame environment from a broader perspective this week, we firmly believe that last week's tier list really kind of hasn't changed. Very little is different than before. There are a few of the electro-shock style rap decks and one-going archetypes floating around that we perhaps didn't cover last week, but for the most part, the list remains the same, and that list is still available over on the Marvel Snap Zone website, so feel free to check that out. Otherwise, I'm going to spend some time talking to you about the decks that we think are going to be the best to rack up cubes as quickly as possible. Take full advantage of the full plethora of bots that are on the ladder right now and kind of benefit from some of their tendencies. So let us take a look at these decks in order. There's going to be some here for people that have an established pool 3 chunk of cards to play with, and some here for people that are in fact a bit newer to the game or maybe don't have access to the entire repertoire of cards that pool 3 has to offer. So first of all, we're going to start by taking a look at kind of the kingpin of the game as far as many of us are concerned, and that is the Serra Miracle deck. It is one heck of a haymaker, and probably the best deck in the game for playing for 8 cubes as often as possible. It's probably just the best deck for the job. Against bots, the deck is fantastic. The opponent always tends to kind of like snap around turn 3 or turn 4 if they're ahead on board, and at that point, if you assess your hand, it's going to be pretty easy for you to be able to tell whether or not you should play out your last few turns, snap back, or retreat and leave the game at that point. The Ghost Rider build is probably the optimal one for just raking in cubes from that standpoint. It's very unpredictable for an opponent and like kind of faster than the versions of this deck that play Magic in order to extend themselves into a longer late game, just because they don't have to play that 7th turn. If you're not familiar with this archetype, basically what you're looking to do is play with 2 locations in mind, using the 3rd location for support abilities for cards like Okoye. You're often going to find your play patterns are going to be passing on turn 1, Playing a card like Angela on a good or neutral location, or something like Okoye in a neutral or bad location. Trying to set up something like Bishop on turn 3. And turn 4, you tend to find that you don't do an awful lot unless you failed to do one of the previous things on this list on turn 2 or turn 3. You kind of get another window to play out your Angela or your Bishop on this turn. If you need to. Turn 5 is the big pivot turn for this deck. You need to play Serra. You need to have access to Serra for this deck to do its big thing on the final turn of the game. Always trying to play it on turn 5. And then turn 6, you can just go nuts on every location you expect to be winning and dumping everything else onto the location that you do not expect to be winning in this game. And that's very much how Serra Miracle works. It's a well-established archetype at this point, and just really good for punishing early snaps when your opponent can't necessarily tell how your endgame is going to look. So really big recommendation on Serra Miracle. The next, another fan favourite, a well-established archetype at this point. We're going to take a look at Mr. Negative. Mr. Negative, my favourite way to play Marble Snap. I just think it's such a cool, unique effect, and hopefully when these changes do come around, he remains in the spirit of what he's currently doing. Like the Serra deck before it, Mr. Negative kind of just really allows for explosive final turn plays that are kind of tough for your opponents to predict. Against bots, you kind of expect the same results as something like Serra. You're really passive in the first few turns, and so there's a good chance the bot wants to snap early. And at that point, you should really just look at your hand and decide whether you want to move on or want to raise the stakes all the way up to that 8 cube mark, punishing the bot who thought they were going to, whip your backside in this one. However, compared to something like Serra, Mr. Negative always feels like it kind of has a competitive shot to win games where you don't draw the namesake. If you don't draw Mr. Negative, you can really kind of still play out a fair game and have a reasonable chance at winning. You can evaluate your draws really easily with a simple equation if you're just trying to farm cubes. You should snap if you have Mr. Negative on turn 4, or Wong and Mystique in hand on the same window, or you just retreat. If all you care about is farming cubes, that's the way to do it. It's obviously super reductive and not a great look at what the deck is capable of, but if you manage to play for 8 cubes every time you draw your good cards and retreat whenever you don't, you're going to end up with a lot more cubes than you started with. The kind of play patterns you expect from a deck like this, not going to do an awful lot on turn 1. Going to play Angela on turn 2 if you have it. Turn 3, you're going to be looking to play Lockjaw if you don't have Mr. Negative in your hand. And then turn 4, you're going to be looking to play the namesake, Mr. Negative, if you have him, or look to play Wong or Jubilee if you don't. You really kind of maybe want to prioritize Wong if you have Mystique in hand already. If you have none of this, you can play Lockjaw onto a location. You can also play onto Lockjaw's location should you have played it on turn 3. The only things you want to make sure you do not play onto the same location as Lockjaw really are Wong and Mr. Negative, so try and keep them separate if you can. Turn 5, you're going to want to play Magic a lot. If you've played Mr. Negative on the previous turn, you want to extend your game as long as possible, draw more cards that you've inverted with Mr. Negative. You can play Mystique if you've already played Wong the previous turn, possibly on the same location if required. Or you can retreat at this point if you haven't set up anything that we've kind of been talking about in this turn breakdown. Turn 6 and turn 7 really are a case of just benefit from all the stuff you just did. If you've been Mr. Negative, you've flipped everything over, play all your cheap, stupid, expensive, insane value stuff, create a ridiculous endgame board. If you've played Wong into Mystique, well, then you're going to have the ability to just double up all of your effects multiple times, which let you do some silly things and overpower your opponent in the late game. So another fantastic deck with just great final turns that's going to let you snap up those cubes really quick if you're looking to rank up. Next up, we have a Hela discard. Now, this is also another well-established archetype that kind of most people are aware of in some capacity at this point, and it's probably the most controversial pick for this full collections deck part of today's tier list. Discard's widely considered to be really unreliable, but in the context of trying to accumulate cubes as quickly as we can, I don't think that's a bad trait. In other card games, this kind of deck is a gimmick. Or a high roll deck, if you like. But in Marble Snap, we kind of control our own stakes, which means we can simply snap when we high roll and retreat when we don't. In other words, the Hela decks very much look to be perfectly fitting the bill if all you want to do is mindlessly farm cubes. And that's, again, a bit dismissive of what this deck is capable of, but kind of what we're looking at today for the benefit of everybody here. If you have Invisible Woman in your opening hand, you can snap. If you have tons of discard effects and Hela is still in your deck, snap. No game plan and your opponent snapped, retreat. You took a gamble and discarded Hela by accident, retreat. Out you go. It's a super limited approach. Arguably maybe a bit silly. But honestly, like farming the ladder when you lack time is often going to be kind of a very limited thing to do. So it makes sense that a deck like this is going to be very good at it. Compared to decks like Sarah and Mr. Negative, I don't think this is quite as good. It's going to lose more games overall over a large sample size. But because the deck isn't really demanding in terms of knowledge or play patterns as the other two, you can put on a TV show, put on a film, watch some YouTube videos or something, and just be spamming Hela discard on the side to rank your cubes up. Really common play pattern to this deck. You're going to find that you don't do a lot on turn 1 unless you have access to Ebony Maw. Pop it on a location if it's not one you're going to be able to abuse. If the first location reveals itself and it's not very good, just stick Ebony Maw on it and lock it down as best you can. Turn 2, you really do want to play Invisible Woman. If you can, realistically, it's something that you're looking to achieve. You can occasionally just play Colleen Wing on this turn if you have Ebony Maw in your hand and you want to get rid of it and discard something that is not particularly impactful. Turn 3, you're very much going to just be looking to play discard effects if Hela isn't at risk. If you need to risk discarding Hela, do so, and you can retreat if you discard her. And then, of course, all the way up to turn 6, that's going to be the plan. And then on turn 6, you're going to want to just play Hela, preferably on Invisible Woman's location if you have set that up on turn 2, to make sure that it is revealing last and bringing back everything you discard. Otherwise, just play Hela and bring everything back as best you can to as many locations as possible. Great high roll deck, really good for just mindlessly crunching cubes. Highly recommend if that's what you're looking for. So we're going to take a second to look at a few of the more budget-friendly options to grind cubes today. When you're on a budget, it's pretty likely you're going to be asking things like Angela and Bishop for help. So we're going to take a look at a deck we featured in our recent Deck Doctor segment, actually, and is, in my opinion, one of the best ways of getting into the game aggressively and ranking up quickly. That is the Sandman aggro deck you see on screen now. Another card that's kind of been doing a lot of work. Sandman is kind of iconic, and it's not like he's really key to this deck, but the card feels great in this ongoing aggro build. Against bots, the deck is going to be pretty easy to play. You're not looking to necessarily have to find Sandman. You should probably be focusing on Angela. It's just a fantastic 2-drop. Make sure you use it to secure a location. And you can use things like Namor alongside Mr. Fantastic. And sometimes even Claw to help like bump up a second location that Angela isn't dominating. On the last turn, you're looking to just slam down Spectrum, massive buff, and some surprise potential on the last turn of the game if your opponent didn't necessarily think to play around Spectrum with all of your ongoing abilities. Against the human players out there, Sandman feels a lot more necessary. You're going to want to draw Sandman very often here, as it kind of drastically reduces the power level of your opponent's like endgame power, and keeps yours mostly untouched. If you can find 2 of the other like higher cost cards in your deck towards the end. Namor's super happy to be on a location by himself. Iron Man normally wins a location, mostly by itself. Claw and Spectrum are just like multi-lane flexibility. You can do all kinds of things, and although you can only play 1 card a turn, shoot a Sandman, you can affect multiple lanes at the same time and kind of just make your way through that limitation that Sandman provides. It's a fantastic deck, this one, on a budget to just grind away those cubes. Most of the powerful cards that are in Pool 2 and Pool 1 find a home in this deck, and kind of create some very natural play patterns. So I highly recommend trying this one out if you're looking to grind people out and shut down Sarah and decks like Mr. Negative with Sandman. And then last but not least, of decks that we'd like to look at to grind cubes today, we're going to look at our Pool 2 version of the Discard Swarm deck. It's another deck that is looking to grow Angela, this time alongside Bishop, as opposed to being by itself. The namesake cards here really are going to be Swarm and Apocalypse. They are your main discard targets. The cheap cards that usually do well alongside Angela and Bishop are kind of just great to manage your hand. Make sure that you are only discarding Swarm and Apocalypse. They're cheap costs to make sure you kind of hit the right cards when you're playing things like Lady Sif or Blade or even Swordmaster to discard the things that you're looking to discard. Now, this deck doesn't really benefit specifically from playing against bots or real players. It's kind of about the same. But I think it's a really good one to play if you're adopting the mindset of farming cubes. You don't really have a lot of flexibility with your game plan. It's kind of just like playing a deck that is all about maximizing synergies in this case. If you're on a budget, you're still kind of maybe learning some of the fundamentals of the game. You maybe can't necessarily identify what your opponent is doing in their first few turns, and discard is not going to punish you for this because you're kind of playing a very linear game plan. It's going to be making it a very good choice for your newer players, and definitely something to keep in mind if that's a category you fall into. Each game, you kind of want to be looking to maximize Angela and Bishop. They are very much your centerpieces. They're going to grow very quickly if you can play them early. And you're really going to want to benefit from a wave of swarms and a massive apocalypse in the late game as much as you possibly can. There are a few more subtle lines of play. You can use Iron Fist to grow Angela and then move the unit across a location to grow Angela some more. It can also be used to like lock up locations like Klin or Sanctum Sanctorium that maybe you don't play particularly well into. Much like Nightcrawler can as well. So I think overall this deck is probably the easiest of today's decks to pick up and start playing fresh. It's going to be really good at grinding cubes for you if you're newer to the game and limited in what you can play and maybe don't know all the decks that are out there just yet. And it's still just a completely valid option if you have more flexible options available to you too. It's fairly simple and fairly linear to play, and that makes it a great choice for a thing like this. As always, folks, thank you very much for joining us for our weekly tier list content. We look forward to just getting some more feedback from you. Let us know what you're enjoying and what you aren't. Of course, as always, the article for this list also available over on MarvelSnapZone.com. Go and check it out. Grab everything in Word form. You'll also be able to find the deck lists mentioned in today's article and just kind of export them for your own play if you want a nice, easy way to do that. If you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to us here on YouTube. We want to make more content for you here at Marvel Snap Zone and keep supporting this growing game, help it become everything that it can be. And you hitting that bell and turning on notifications goes a really long way in helping us figure out exactly what it is that we're doing right when it comes to making Snap content. If there's anything else I can do for you, please let me know in the comment section below. I'd love to hear all about it. Otherwise, I've been HowlingMines, you've been amazing, and this has been Marvel Snap Zone. Take care.